Hello and welcome to this tutorial of large language models. In this tutorial, I want to talk about different types of LLMs. We can generally categorize LLM into two different types, commercial or closed source LLMs and open source LLMs. In this episode and tutorial, I want to talk about the pros and cons of each of these large language models. And I want to show you a very simple example of how we can use each of them. Commercial LLMs are those models that we cannot access them. We cannot access their code, we cannot access their trained parameters, we cannot download them and run them locally on our own machine. But if you want to use them, there are two ways. The first way is that they have like web platform. They can log in and use their chat box to send queries and get response. And the second uh, way of accessing them is that, for example, if you have a project and you want to use and integrate LLMs into your project and send queries, you need to get access to their API, and in order to do that, you have to pay. So they usually require payments for use. As I said, you cannot locally install them or modify them. And here I brought three examples of commercial LLMs: ChatGPT, GPT-4, GPT 3.5, which were developed by OpenAI, Cloudy, and Gemini. So these are only three examples of commercial LLMs. We definitely have much more than that. Before jumping to the next slide, I would like to show you actually the chat platforms of them. This is a platform, the chat box of Cloudy. This is ChatGPT, and this is Gemini. So you can actually send your query and get the response. Commercial LLMs have some pros and cons. The first advantage of using them is that they usually have high performance and accuracy. They are regularly updated, and they are regularly have some improvements. They have professional supports because the big companies like Gemini, like Google, OpenAI, and Microsoft support them, and they have scalable infrastructure. But they also have some disadvantages. The first, and I think the biggest disadvantage of using commercial LLMs is their ongoing cost. For example, if you want to use something like GPT-4 in your code, depends on the number of queries, the number of tokens that you use to send them your query. The cost might vary, but I believe that if you want to use something like GPT-4 and you have a lot of number of queries, that's gonna be not affordable for individuals. The second concern is that because you're sending your request over the internet, for example, if you have some code and you just send it over the internet, so you definitely have some data privacy concerns about that. And the third disadvantage is that you cannot customize or modify them. What I mean here is that sometimes we have our own data for a specific task and we want to train, grab the LLM, train the LLM on our own data and fine tune them for a specific task. But these types of LLMs are not modifiable and you cannot customize them. And they depend on a provider. This is one of the very simple examples of how to access commercial LLMs. For example, if I in my projects and in my code, if I want to use something like GPT-4, I have to uh, get access to the API key, which I will show you in practice in next episode, how we can like get the API key, and based on, your queries and number of queries, the number of tokens you have to actually pay. But on the other hand, we have open source LLMs. Open source LLMs are the models that you can download, run, and modify them locally. So they are free to use and modify. You can run them locally on your hardware. You have full control over data and usage. Here I brought some examples of open source LLMs. Llama, which was developed by Meta, Mistral, Quen, DeepSeek, and P3. I'm not surprised if you haven't heard the names of some of these open source LLMs, but in the next episodes, we will go through all of them. I'll show their like how well they work in practice and for different examples. And I think similar to the commercial LLMs, they also have some pros and cons. The first advantage is that they do not have an ongoing cost. When you once you set up them on your machine, you can easily like send your queries, get the response, and you don't have to pay per query. So, and because you are running them on your local machine, so you have complete data privacy. And the third advantage is that you can customize them, you can fine tune them for your specific task. You can download the model, you can, when you have a large amount of data, for example, for a specific task, you can modify them. So, what is actually the advantage of cus- custom, customizing or like modifying the LLM for a specific task? When you are using an LLM and that LLM for your specific task is not working well. For example, the LLMs might not be good at vulnerability discovery. If I have a large amount of data, I can, use these open source LLMs and customize them for and fine tune them for that specific task. And um, they also have some disadvantages. So they require technical setup, which I'm not worried about that because I'm going to show you in the next episode how to set up them locally on your machine. But the biggest issue with these open source LLMs is that they require GPUs. And it requires like hardware with GPUs and depends on how big your LLM is, you may, require a GPU with a bigger RAM. So uh, the issue, the big issue with them is the hardware requirements, but I'm gonna talk about like how we can address it that can be affordable for individuals in compare with like commercial LLMs. And the third disadvantage is their performance may vary. Depends on the model that you are using, the parameters that you are using might be different. But I believe that based on my personal experience, I believe that we are kind of like the society is kind of underestimating the open source LLMs. And I believe that some of them, their performance can be comparable to the commercial LLMs. And we're gonna see some practical examples and we're gonna actually compare their performance. But it really depends on which model you are using, how big the model is. And the last disadvantage is that they usually do not have official support, but they are regularly updated. So among all these cons, I believe the second one, the hardware requirements, is the biggest issue with these open source LLMs. So this is a very simple example of how to get access open source LLM. Once you're like uh, want to like download the model, you can use like some libraries and you can download the model and send the query. So I'll show you the setup in practice, and I don't want to go through the details in this episode. But so, in a nutshell, in this episode, we got familiar with different types of LLMs. We saw some examples and we saw the advantages and disadvantages of each of them. And in the next few episodes, we'll see them, the experience, the performance of both of them in practice. And I hope that this episode was useful for you and see you in the next episode.